much to go over today. I am just going to hop right into it. I actually thought I had a dedicated clone video, and I don't. I just talk about them often. And what's really interesting is 2024 moving forward feels like the time of, let's call it clone disclosure. And what's also really interesting is back in 2020, when I was prompted to talk about the Galactic Federation publicly for the first time ever, shortly thereafter, there was a lot of political and governmental disclosure around the Galactic Federation. The fact that clones and cloning has come up so much in 2024 leads me to believe that there are going to be massive amounts of disclosure around clones and cloning moving forward. So please keep your eyes out. I don't know to what extent that disclosure is going to be, but today I'm going to give you a huge overview on clones and cloning and what it is and how it's done and why they do it and what we're going to see in the future. All right, let's do it. Let's get into it. All right. First of all, I want to talk about how I even know about this stuff, okay? I want to remind you all that I'm a remote viewer. That would be sort of my main title or label for what I do and how I gain access to information. So I've been remote viewing now and getting out of my body and exploring the world around me for over a decade. It was actually back when I was 18 years old when I started to, through actually past life regression techniques, put myself into a trance-like state and then be able to explore the world around me. And so I ended up telling my dad that I could do this. I said, "Hey dad, it's so weird, but I can consciously take myself out of my body and go wherever I want to go. I could go over to my neighbor's house or, go down the street or tune into a classroom that my university was hosting." And what my dad told me was, "You can never tell anyone that you're doing this." And he told me that the government would take me and experiment on me if I were to tell people that I could just do this thing. So he put just the fear of the government in me at such a young age. So I will say that I do still have that fear, but we've come a long way. And I think that what I talk about, the powers that were, we're going to call them, I think that they just assume that the rest of the world is going to think I'm crazy and discredit me. And sure, let them think that, right? I also think that their power is dwindling and they just don't have the numbers to keep up with all of the people, which is great. So there's power in numbers in that way. And then what else? So yeah, around 19, 20 years old, I was obsessed with everything conspiracies and agendas. That's when I ended up stumbling across the people who were in charge, who turned out not to be actual people. They turned out to be dinosaur people. That's what I called them. I thought that they looked like giant dinosaur humanoids. And so I called them dinosaur people for a while. They were reptilians. And so that's when I stumbled across the first time ever, the cloning facility. Now, at that point in time, I was in and out of military bases. I was exploring. I'd also been abducted by that time. So a lot of the military bases I was exploring had extraterrestrial life. That was super fascinating. I got into some tricky situations. I got kicked out of some stuff. But then I stumbled across this cloning facility. And it was located in America, in the United States. And I was really shocked. Like, I had no idea what I just stumbled across. I had seen a lot of things, but I never even considered cloning. I thought that was maybe a sci-fi concept. Like, in my mind, there was no way that that was possible or that human beings or the governments had the technology. So it was really, really shocking to see bodies in, once again, like a sci-fi scene, in these giant tanks, and they would be the exact same body and they would be older, right? So there's a lot of questions, like, how do they even make a cloning body? Like, what goes into it? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I just wanted to give you my backstory on how I ended up coming across cloning and cloning facilities in the first place. Now, once I discovered that cloning was a thing, and remember, this was back in 2011, 2012, I didn't even get onto YouTube until 2016. Like, I really kept all this information under wraps for an extremely long time before I felt safe or comfortable enough. And even then, I didn't talk about what I was seeing and finding. So, one of my big curious questions was, back then anyway, was who have they actually done this to? Who have they actually cloned? And so immediately I got essentially the history or the flash. And if you do remote view, you know that this is possible. Same thing with past life regression. All you need is a question or an intention, and you end up experiencing that thing. So I ended up coming across Michael Jackson. I was never really a fan, but of course, just open minded in my remote viewing experiences. And turns out he was one of the original clones that they publicly released. Okay, so one of the original public clones, which that was quite a while ago. And the reason why they ended up cloning Michael Jackson was he ended up having a lot of influence, a lot more influence than they thought he would have. And also, he started to talk badly against the music industry. And so he kind of started getting out of line a little bit. And so, because of that, and he didn't want to follow their rules and regulations, and he was really spreading a lot of light and love and joy across the planet, they ended up killing him off and cloning his body. Now, back then, cloning was extremely expensive. I think a huge part of these missing trillions of dollars from the American government, at least, are going into these cloning facilities and other sort of back end black projects. And so what happened was their clones were not very advanced, and they cost a lot of money, and the clone body kept dying. Like basically the Michael Jackson clone body kept sort of, how do I say this, like decaying. And so they had to replace him every couple of years. And every time they replaced him, his skin got paler and his face got weirder. And there was a lot of issues with cloning back at that time. And so what's interesting is a theory of mine, as always, take it or leave it, because I get how crazy this is. A theory of mine is that they're really popularizing plastic surgery among celebrities and politicians and public figures. And the reason why is because if someone shows up, I don't know, with a different nose or higher cheekbones or looking a lot younger, we can all just blame plastic surgery rather than what potentially could be going on, which is cloning. And of course, there's a lot of other sort of variables around this as well, but just something to keep in mind. And we're going to talk about some of those variables as well. Okay. So why do they clone? And when I reference they, I'm truly talking about the shadow government, right? The powers, I like to call them the powers that were rather than the powers that be. But I think we can all agree that there is a very elusive back-end organization that goes beyond borders, that goes beyond currency and finances, and it's an amalgamation of individuals who really run the show, right? Okay, so why do they clone? Why? So the main reason why I've seen them clone is because they will have someone who's a part of their organization, whether you want to call it the shadow government or the Illuminati or just the reptilians. They will go through different rituals to be a part of this club in order to gain access to fame and riches and power and money and all of the things, right? And so when those individuals, if those individuals start speaking out and getting out of line, they will, especially in more of the extreme cases, they'll go through things like MK Ultra programming to try and get them back in line or put them on heavy doses of medication. These are all of the solutions that they pretty much try to keep them in line before they remove them and replace them, right? Now, once again, cloning it's not an exact science. They've gotten really good at it, but it is really expensive. So they do try and avoid it. I will say these days, they are replacing these influencers and these celebrities and politicians way more than they ever have. I think that the technology is getting a lot better, and that's probably why, and cheaper as well. So once again, why do they do it? They do it to individuals who are getting out of line, who have already signed up to be a part of that organization. Yes, and then I will also say that sometimes it's not actually a clone at all, and they use body doubles and they use very realistic silicone masks of the person. So sometimes it's not a clone. Some people think it's a clone, but it's actually not because it's just a body double and a mask, and they'll do that too, especially if it's an appearance that doesn't require speaking. So I've seen that as well. And then what's really interesting is sometimes they will have clones of an individual and they will not kill that person off. They will let that person live, but they'll basically coordinate public appearances and say, hey, you've got to stay super hidden or at home or whatever while your clone goes out and does this thing. And there's various reasons why they use the clones. Like sometimes, once again, if the person is a little bit too volatile, or maybe they are like really into drinking or drugs or whatever, and they can't sort of meet their obligations, they'll put the clone in instead, and they'll keep the person there, sort of like a body double. So that's fascinating. And then once again, sometimes if the person is really unruly, they will just kill them off, unfortunately, and completely replace them with a clone. I know that I've heard the question, do the individual's families know that it's a clone? And most of the time, no, they don't, right? Which is wild, actually. So there's a lot of skeptics out there, and I get it. I would say cloning is probably one of the craziest agenda conspiracies I believe in, and that's saying a lot considering reptilians and ghosts and past lives and aliens and all of the other things. It's really, for me, it's also hard to get my head around, like, really? Like, it's just a whole other layer of what's happening. To those of you who are skeptical, great, you're questioning everything. I promote that so much because you need to question and have that discernment for yourself, especially with the rise of AI. That being said, right now, if you wanted to, you could clone your pet for $50,000. Just let that sink in. Do you remember the sheep Dolly that they cloned back in what, the 80s, the 90s? They literally cloned a sheep. Okay, you can now pay to get your pet cloned. I don't recommend it. And the reason why I don't recommend it is because it's going to be a different consciousness, right? We're going to talk about that. All right. So yeah, just know that, remember, whatever technology we have on the front end publicly, they have what they estimate they have 40 years in advance the technology. We're talking like the governments and the shadow government, and I don't know who kind of created that statistic, but what I've seen anyway, it's true. And the fact that you can clone your pet for $50,000 is pretty remarkable. Okay. What else? Yeah, so as long as they stay in line, the powers that be or the powers that were prefer the individual keeping their original body. It is more cost efficient, it's more effective. As long as they're able to control them, that's what they prefer. One individual that comes to mind who has been able to keep his original body, who has a ton of influence, but who's still a part of that organization, would be Justin Bieber, which is pretty surprising seeing how basically big of an influence he is. But he has been, especially all around this Diddy stuff, he has been basically keeping in line with what they want him to do and what they want him to say. That being said, there are Justin Bieber clones that are at the ready if he were to push the boundaries. And he knows that too. Like, he knows in a heartbeat they would kill him off. So, anyway. Okay, so how does it work, right? Like, how do they actually create the body? And then how do they get the body to function in a certain way? So I'm going to explain this because I was really curious about this, and I ended up remote viewing the whole process of cloning, which is fascinating. Before we get there, if you are interested in this, if you are, this is going to sound just so wild, and it is, but If you want to know more about how cloning works and what the possibilities are, and you want to explore that with me, then I highly recommend that you check out the Kate Middleton video series on my website. If you are a member, you get it absolutely for free. And if you don't want to be a member, that's okay. I think it's like $10. And you get access to 7 videos, almost 7 hours of me remote viewing Kate Middleton and a cloning facility. And it's just like probably one of the craziest things I've ever done. And usually I do crazy things alone, but I did this with everyone. So I don't know. Anyway, go check that out if you're actually fascinated in this. And then also, just the other day, just a couple days ago, I remote viewed the White Hat Alliance base. So I've seen a lot of military bases, a lot of nefarious stuff, but I've never actually remote viewed the White Hat Alliance or the Collective's base. And I did, and I was allowed in, and that was so fascinating. And then, of course, they were like creeping on me, they were remote viewing on me, and it was a whole thing. But go check that out. If you want to know more about the White Hat Alliance and about their initiatives, please go check out that video because it was really wild. Also, if you are a creator member, you get that for free too. So might as well just be a creator and get access to everything. Okay, how does it work? How do they actually clone? As always, take it or leave it. It's pretty wild. All right. So, first of all, they get the influential person's DNA. And remember, even though I've only remote viewed a cloning base in America, in the United States, I'm sure they have cloning bases all over the world. I just haven't gone there. So they essentially get the person's DNA, and then they, it's kind of like creating a baby. How do I say this? It's like creating a baby in like a fake embryo sac, like a fake uterus, but instead of creating a baby, they're creating like a full human body, and they'll do like an age progression. So the clone will come out the same age as the time of the person's DNA, if that makes sense. And then essentially that clone body will start aging from that time so that the aging is related to the person in real life. Okay, so they're able to do that. I'm not a scientist. I have no idea how they do that, but that's what I've seen. I've seen all of the different stages of them creating these bodies, and they all get created at that age. They don't like create a baby and then age advance them. The clone body is created at the age that the DNA is taken. Okay, and then it just ages with that person so that when and if that person needs to be replaced, they wake up the clone body, and we're going to talk about that. So, hold on. Yep. Okay. So once a clone body is ready, right, they transfer a consciousness into it. So what's really fascinating is that body is essentially just an empty vessel, and it's a bunch of machines that are keeping the body, the blood pumping, the body moving, all of that. The problem is that when a body is not connected to the technology, it can't function, right? And I know that I've looked into organic robots before, and that's a whole other story. But essentially, in order to have a body, and also there's like this whole concept of NPCs, which I believe in to an extent, but it's very nuanced. So anyway, in order for the clone body to operate, it has to have a fractal of source energy. Think about source energy or the universal energy or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Think about that as the battery pack that you put into a body. The machine, the body, it's not going to move. It's not going to go. It's not going to live and exist autonomously without this fractal of source, right? This connection to energy. And so this is where it gets kind of weird, right? So essentially they have a room in this cloning facility, and in the room there are these like canisters, and in the canisters are different consciousnesses, different souls, I guess. And those souls, and I haven't gone into like how they even get the souls, like how do they even harvest the souls, which is a whole other thing that I'd be curious to look into. But essentially they take these canisters and they put it into a machine, and like imagine the clone body sort of sitting in a chair. They put the canister in a machine, and then it like kind of shoots the consciousness into the body, and that's what allows the body to function free of the machines. Now, sometimes they will use the same consciousness as the real body or the previous clone body. The reason why they would want to do that is the previous consciousness already has all of the mannerisms, all of the memories, all of the experiences of the previous clone. Typically, what they do is once they get rid of the original person, they also get rid of the original soul. The problem is that the reason why they wanted to get rid of that person to begin with is because they were rebellious. They were fighting back. Of course, they don't want to bring that rebellious spirit back into a new body. So what they do is they take kind of a random consciousness and they put it into the clone body, and then it goes through a process of programming. Very similar, very much so based on the old school MK Ultra programming. They will program the consciousness to work with, like we're talking about, the physical rehabilitation, the mental, the language, the dialect, everything. Like this consciousness has to now work with a brand new body, and it has to work with a series of, mannerisms and everything. So it goes through about a 6-month period of intense training and programming to become that individual. That's why it's really difficult to kill someone off and bring in a clone right away. There's usually a period where that person is not seen for a long period of time when they're sort of establishing that new clone, right? It's very fascinating. Once again, take it or leave it. I get how crazy this sounds. Oh yeah. And then another interesting fact, clone bodies only last so long, kind of like what I was talking about with Michael Jackson. His was the first public clone, and it really just deteriorated. There's something about, I tried asking about this, there's something about like the cells, right? Like, so as we age, we have these like half-lives, our cells they don't have like as much whatever we need to stay young and healthy. And so the clone bodies, it's almost like the aging and the deterioration is like rapid, right? And so before, they would only last anywhere between 3 and 5 years if they were lucky. Nowadays, these new clones are lasting anywhere between 10 and 15 years is what I've seen. But still, they don't last very long for a variety of reasons, but it's just something interesting. And yeah, that's it. That's a lot. There's a lot more, but like I said, if you want to see me live remote viewing, especially if you're interested in cloning stuff, check out the Kate Middleton series. That all happened this past year, and like I said, it was one of the, and it gives me full body chills just thinking about her and everything that happened. But yeah, it's a 7-part video series. I have a new video coming out on January 15th. We're going to check into Kate Middleton, make sure she's good, and see what's going on with her. Maybe ask her about her sister or sister-in-law. I think it'll be fascinating. But yeah, and so yeah, if you want to check that out, definitely do so. It's on my website. Other than that, please be sure to give this video a like, share it to other weirdos, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Of course, I will see you very soon in the highest potential timeline. Bye for now.